Welcome to the Scottish Basketball Podcast. In this episode, I chat with Kieron Achara to look back on the 2026 Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. I'm delighted to welcome Kieron to the podcast. Hi, Kieron.
How's it going?
Good, thank you. Thanks for taking the time. Just with a couple of weeks gone now since the end of the Commonwealth Games, that would be a great time to just take half an hour and just reflect on your own role in the Commonwealth Games and obviously the performance of the four Team Scotland teams in the competitions. So maybe just to start off, maybe you could just talk us through what were you actually doing before and during the games, and maybe you could also reflect on your involvement in the opening ceremony.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate to be brought in as the head of performance and pathways at Basketball Scotland, and one of my first roles coming into the role was like, okay, in 4 months' time we're going to be competing at the Commonwealth Games with 4 teams. So actually, let's kind of look at the prep and kind of get the team in place to ensure that we have essentially the best opportunity. We knew we had a 1 month window to essentially kind of really prepare and get things going. So again, that was the focal point, bringing the right team. I was really lucky. My predecessor Barry Lang, he had assembled some great people. So I essentially just met up with those said people, the coaches, performance leads, physios, and we just kind of took it from there and ensured that we were taking advantage of every single minute that we had with the said players to just ensure that they were in the right mindset, physically, mentally, and emotionally, just be ready to compete in those games.
You also had a role with the athletes advisory group, and I suppose were there any insights or unusual interactions? I suppose just any moments with other sports that you feel like Basketball Scotland and yourself can take forward to support basketball in sort of future competitions, future development?
Yeah, I mean, I was in it at the from a governance standpoint. I learned so much being on the board at Glasgow 26, and I'm still on the board at this moment in time as we start to wind down the company. But it was a massive learning, and I was in that role before getting the position with Basketball Scotland. So it was nice to see all the preparation and time, all the areas that go into running major events. And I guess that kind of sparked the interest of how we kind of look at things in Scotland sometimes. So I always say that we're quite fixture focused, when actually we could probably look to be a little bit more event focused in some of the things that we kind of deliver. So instead of thinking about, okay, getting through the fixture, job done, actually, what could we have done differently? What areas need to be improved on? What things can we add to the experience for the participant, as well as and that's where the athlete advisory group comes in, because actually just listening to the athletes, the kind of concerns, we talked about being a reimagined games. That means there was going to be differences. So what people had competed in previous games, what was going to be different, being able to communicate that and prepare them in those environments. I think that kind of gave us a little bit of a head start, because I was kind of in those conversations that we could actually kind of start to think about potential communication lines that we were going to have with our athletes in those spaces to ensure that they were best prepared for Glasgow.
What do you think of all the different people involved, the different events and training and preparation you did? What do you think prepared Team Scotland best for the games?
So I think that from a Team Scotland standpoint, and specifically in the basketball space, we having our 4 teams come together, our 2 wheelchair teams and 2 running teams, being in a central venue that everyone was together, super aligned, it allowed us to kind of, you realize that there's things that you're going through that kind of bond you together, but then there's also things that you can learn from and kind of communicate. So I think that from our coaches in those spaces, all the different facets of the coaches, with our performance lead and Stephen Bird, who I cannot credit enough. He was with me in 2018. Did work with us when I was as part of GB with our women's senior team, and now been able to continue with him in the role as performance leads for our 4 teams. He was very much of, okay, actually, how do we maximize certain situations? So if we have that space for 15 minutes, how do we best maximize those 15 minutes? And I think that was a change in narrative, because, in the past, some programs are 3 years long or 2 years long, or they have this, they have that, and we kind of hide behind, if we only had this amount of time. Well, the reality is we didn't have that amount of time. The players weren't together all the time. So with the time that we did have, how do we use that to the best of our abilities? So I would say that there was massive learnings in our coaches about actually being a little bit more efficient and effective with their time, and actually being able to communicate that in the wider group, that they could bounce off ideas, that there was a collective there. So actually you weren't alone. I think that was really, really important. From a wider Team Scotland perspective, the same thing. They're really good at bringing people together, showing them the motivational videos, kind of showing them the one team kind of mindset and psyche, and being supportive there. So there was a lot of services that we tapped into. Like from a sports psychologist standpoint, we were really fortunate from Sports Scotland to get a lot of support that we best utilised. We had them on webinars. We did check-ins when people were away. We were monitoring them to see how they were feeling mentally, as well as physically within their preparation camps, so we could make those interventions that we needed to make if they were needed. And I think that feeling that you're there supported on and off the court played a massive part of bringing us together.
To the other end of that, do you think there was anything missing from the pre-games prep that you would do differently, looking back now?
There's always going to be things missing, and to be fair, we're actually still going through the feedback from our athletes and getting ready to speak with our coaches to have that, because I want to give them a little bit of reflection time. But I think that competition-wise, I think that I would have loved to have played a couple more games, especially in the wheelchair side of things, that we scrambled and we got some good competition just before the games. But naively, I thought it would have been a lot easier to get games a little bit earlier in the calendar. So I definitely would have looked to kind of embed them a little bit earlier. The other element for me is that it's the legacy piece. Okay, it's the kind of what next check-ins, what services are we actually offering for those athletes. Not even that, how do you become one of the players? We obviously had a selection policy. We had a selection panel. We had the kind of coming together of that. But actually, in hindsight, it was really hard to make some selections because they weren't playing in a 3x3 capacity on a regular basis to make decisions. We were maybe looking at more from a 5v5 and hoping they would be able to adapt into those environments. Obviously, in the future, we want to have more 3x3 competition that people can work on their ranking points and everything else to maybe make the decisions a little bit easier.
To the games themselves, as we've mentioned, we had 4 teams participating, 3 medal matches, 2 medals in the end, a women's wheelchair silver and a men's running bronze. I suppose from a Team Scotland basketball point of view, were the games a success? Did Team Scotland view the basketball as a success? And how did that maybe compare against targets that you had before the competition?
Yeah, so the targets were quite simplistic. We had to have 2 teams finish in top 4. So that was where our targets were. Obviously, we exceeded that. Definitely a success, and it was a success in 2 counts. For me, I go back to the actual playing, showing that we can compete at those levels. And again, the where my mind is like, okay, if we did that a little bit differently, or those 1%ers here, or we had a proper program in place, we could have maybe done. You always want to strive for more. But I think showcasing the game, for me, it was the 2 lights. It was the event itself. I think that, again, going back to what I said before about being fixture focused, I think we need to be doing more events, bringing the communities more together, and actually, more importantly, bringing people who are maybe not a part of the community now to show them that there's opportunities there. So I loved, from the event itself, to see the basketball community come together in a volunteer capacity. We had table officials, we had volunteers, we had people overseeing X, Y, and Z. There was all these different facets of our community that were present, from photographers, videographers, DJs, that showed that we actually have the inner workings within our community to run these spectacular events. It's just now trying to piece that together and say, what do we actually want to do with them? From an actual competition standpoint, I love to see we had, if you look at especially our women's wheelchair game, such young athletes coming up, stepping up. It's now thinking about how do we support their next stages of their journey? How do we keep in contact with people to ensure that there's a pipeline of development that constantly is happening into those spaces, and actually navigating with the 5-on-5 traditional basketball and 3x3, where we have to dip our toes in a little bit more. Do we have to actually step back from that? Is it a part of our official pathway? Do we have to kind of create opportunities? And I think resoundingly, we have to find those opportunities. I'm hoping to do it a little bit more organically. I think that we should be putting on more 3x3 events and let the kind of community speak for itself about how they kind of go into those spaces, and more importantly, showing people how to run and promote their own events. You know, it's going to be a team effort. You know, Basketball Scotland, you know, we can maybe have the vision on certain things, but actually from a delivery standpoint, you know, it's never going to just be a Basketball Scotland responsibility. When it comes to hosting it, we need to have a little bit more entrepreneurial mindset when it comes to certain things as well in those spaces. So I think we can be the catalysts and the trailblazers in those spaces, but actually we have to be mindful and really supportive of others who also want to go into those areas, because we know, most important, that's needed. And that's the one thing from a community standpoint I've said with my experiences in other country. It's finding that balance of actually what do you want to be able to do within those spaces, and us as a governing body not stopping you from that. It's maybe some guidance and support when needed, but not everyone needs that. There's going to be elements that they're maybe supporting and guiding us. So that's the kind of relationship we hope to build going forward after this experience with the Games.
And yeah, just a final point to that, I suppose, when you look at the whole picture, the competitive side of Team Scotland, that whole sort of organisational structure around it, like how close do you think that combined effort came to like maximising the full potential that event could have had? And I suppose, do you have any thoughts about like what the gaps that were left to close would be, and what you'd be like working on going forward with that sort of whole community effort?
Yeah, like I said, I think that the things that if I talk about what we wanted out of the Games originally, like I had this big emphasis on, you know, as an organisation, so it wasn't just me, but a big emphasis of storytelling, trying to tell the stories, and people like yourself were actually willing to step up and allowed to promote some of the athletes that we have, because we have some amazing athletes in Scotland doing amazing things in the basketball space. And you know, that's not just athletes. We have, you know, table officials. We have to be able to tell more stories and be able to create that narrative. Don't know if you saw the billboard campaign that was put on. We had a really great sponsor in Pelion who really stepped up for us, who hired a creative team. You know, our athletes front and centre on billboards throughout Glasgow. That was a special moment for them as athletes, you know, to be able to see that, be recognised in those spaces, and then the media attention that came with it, you know. And what you'll start to see now is, especially in the medalist perspective, there'll be more opportunities. So actually, are we equipping our athletes to handle those opportunities, to prepare them for those opportunities? From the community side of things, is I genuinely believe we have a strong enough community that when we come together, we can overcome so much. I think what we've struggled with is we've been reactive at times for those certain things as opposed to proactive. So my biggest learning again is, if you're looking at maximising everything, we should be questioning every facet of what we deliver within basketball. We should be thinking, okay, if we're looking at our calendar, is that the right way to be doing things? Is there a better way of doing things? Is there ways to improve? What are we doing really, really well? What are we doing really badly? How do we actually overcome those things? How do we come together more as a collective? So is that a communication thing? You know, how do we work better with our regional bodies and associations, and looking at in those spaces and say, like, how do we do what is best for basketball in Scotland? So I think that the thing with the Commonwealth Games, it does bring people together. There was something to celebrate within those situations. It's now the impact of that, of actually the mechanisms of, okay, we asked from the community, we're trying to tell stories, we're trying to do this. Well, how do we maximise that with what we already have, and what other things do we actually need to bring to the party, and where can we get those support from? And again, we've got some great partners in Sport Scotland. We've got British Basketball we'll be doing a little bit of work with. We've got great support, the Caledonia Gladiators in partnership. You know, we're going to be tapping into that further education space a little bit more. Having, you know, a quality sponsor on board as well is really, really helpful, because it's not about financially what they're bringing. It's exposure an opportunity as well. I think that's really, really important.
Nice segues, almost as if we'd rehearsed this. But of all those different, maybe unsung heroes, like you say, people in the background who are supporting your efforts, maybe pick one of them, and I suppose just talk about their role and their impact and their place within the group of Team Scotland across the games.
You know what? That's really. I'll probably go from a performance lens first, right? So if I was saying that Stephen Birdie, and again, I've mentioned him already. I've had a lot of people in that performance lead space from a sports science and for some reason he just gets it. Like he's Australian, but he is Scottish. Like he's just how he makes us think about our culture and who we are and what we can achieve. It's really hard to put into words. It's one of those things that explain. Like I promise you, if you speak to any player within our program, they will say the exact same thing. It's just he has this unique way of kind of connecting and getting buy-in, and not only that, he holds us to standards and expectations that you just don't want to disappoint. And from a legacy piece, it's what I am adamant of doing is retaining him in some capacity within our structures. And we're already having those conversations, and I know that he will be there, willing to support. It's now being able to embed that into everything that we do within those spaces, from our youth levels all the way up. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be this thing that's isolated for one experience. This has to be something that we sprinkle throughout the whole system. So that's the biggest takeaway and biggest support from a performance lens there. From an actual, just the whole program, I genuinely, it's probably the diplomatic answer, I cannot, it's the sum of its parts. Like we've had so much support. Like I said, the Gladiators been able to use the facility there, tap into their resource, everything else. Paleon came to the party and said, like, what can we do? And I think, the team pulling off that partnership, especially in that space, and willing to step up and support, and again being very mindful of the Commonwealth Games as it's an experience, but actually the legacy of that's where the real magic's going to start to happen. You know what I mean? Like we've now been given the exposure, it's now making that next phase. So yeah, again, Sports Scotland, Team Scotland, so many supportive networks. I think the one thing that we've done, which I'm actually really proud of our team, is being able to accept that support. I think sometimes you get so caught up that you're just looking at, I need to do this, I need to do that, but we're not actually thinking about how we can be supported. And I say that to the same thing about our basketball community. We have a lot of asset within Scotland that we probably haven't tapped into, who are probably, there's a willingness there. So it's been able to listen, understand, and ask for that help when needed as well. So yeah, that would probably be my biggest takeaway. Stephen Bird, don't know if you've spoken with Birdie before, would be a really interesting, unbelievable person, made a massive impact to our program.
Maybe pick for us one moment across the 5 days that you look back on now most proudly.
You know what? For me, I got super emotional. It was actually when the music came on for the athletes coming out, especially in our women's wheelchair team, like what Robin did with that young group, brought them all together, with Mark Stevenson's support in the initial stages, seeing them come out in front of a home crowd, pumping their fists, crowd going crazy. It literally 2 or 3 times, it literally brought me to tears. It was just such a nice thing to see. You know what I mean? And again, it was getting that public recognition, but then be able to compete on a big stage. So I might say of getting to the medal game, actually, it was well before that for me. Like I'd already seen the success, and that was all of our teams getting that opportunity to play in Glasgow in front of a crowd and actually go and perform. That's probably the one thing that will remain with me. the other day for me was it was before the games, we had our jersey ceremony, and having all the teams there together, giving out the jerseys, reserves as well within that space, that kind of one team psyche. That was a really proud moment as well, just seeing that. That was that play sport, just seeing all the athletes cheering everyone on, just excited to kind of get going. And the athletes who hadn't made those said teams, the reserves, they were still pushing their teammates on to still prepare them for that. That's all you can ask for within a program. And I guess that again, the messaging for me is we actually need to create programs. We have to stop working on projects and building squads for teams. We actually have to try and build a program, because a program is, like I said, the sum of its parts. It's not necessarily who's just competing on that said day. There's a lot of extra things that go into that. So that's the biggest takeaway, and the biggest work on for us as basketball right now is to ensure that we have a program, not dependent on if you're playing in a home nations tournament or playing this or playing that. You just have a Scottish program.
What do you think you have learned about 3x3 specifically from this tournament that you didn't really fully appreciate, or you maybe had the wrong idea about beforehand?
So I was actually a 3x3 early adopter. I think through my FIBA training, we did a lot of work in 3x3. I had all the stats before. About 80% of the football were non-traditional basketball fans. How 3x3 can really help maybe less developed basketball nations to kind of compete at an elite level. So I was already bought in. I think for me, is the change in 3x3 from even 4 years ago. It's a lot more strategic, a lot more tactical. People are now playing in a more professional capacity. But what the thing that surprised me was, even with that, we were still able to compete. And what you'll see is there's a little minutiae of little things that you would maybe tactically do a little bit differently, that if you were playing on a more regular basis, you'd have been more prepared for. But my biggest takeaway is exactly that. Like it's the effect it has on a probably a non-traditional fan to start thinking about basketball. I think that was a massive takeaway as well.
Beyond the results, and again, sort of ties in nicely, like what do you hope a first-time 3x3 viewer, I'm sure there was loads in the crowd in Glasgow, but what would you hope that they took away from watching 3x3? What would you hope that they would take away from watching Team Scotland play at home games and win some medals?
So obviously I'm biased. I'm already getting the kind of feedback, from people reaching out and saying it's the first time ever going to watch basketball. Like, so forget 3x3, forget the traditional game. They just haven't seen basketball before. So the pessimist in me will say, that's not how our usual fixtures look like. But actually the interest and curiosity is something that we have to capitalize on, And I just think it's a great tool because of how agile 3x3 can be. We can take it anywhere. It's not, we're not restricted to this hallway or booking. We can just take it on the road if it's done the right way. So I think for me that it was a messing of the power of the sport. Our sport can be powerful, and more importantly, we can also look at our sport differently. So we maybe have a very traditional view of what this sport is, but actually the sport is evolving, and it can be very agile. And I think that we as a governing body have to be able to capitalize on that, just understanding that there's different ways to promote our sport, and actually some are better suited than others for different things. But actually we've got these tools in our tool bag, and we should be able to use them as we see fit and be agile and be able to adapt in those environments as well.
And very nicely, finally, Kieron, what's next for 3x3 in Scotland? What's that look like over the next 6 months, 12 months, and sort of what would you hope to see, assuming that it's going to be the next tournament might, for example, be the Commonwealth Games in India in 2030? Like, what would you hope that the 3x3 environment in Scotland would look like between now and then? So
the one thing I'm very, very aware of right now is it could be very easy for me to try and just go straight into this mode of like, okay, here's our 3x3 program team, create this kind of central model and try and make it work. I am more of the mindset of I'm still grappling and saying that we need to create the exposure piece first. So the goal is to create more competition. We have to be able to create, and we're kind of looking at most likely in that kind of summer kind of environment, because actually we don't want to conflict with anything right now. We don't know enough about it. How do we use, we've got a lot of free time during the year in Scotland that we're maybe not utilising basketball to its full potential. So actually, can we look to kind of create more summer stops, kind of create more opportunities? I don't know if you saw some of the stuff that we did with GNX. We've got the school games coming up in a couple of weeks. How can we better utilise the school games that actually it's not selection deselection? It's if you win your team at under 18s, you get to go compete. Or the amazing work that Julius Joseph does down south with ball out. Is there ways of us actually creating stops, and if you win that stop, you can then go and play in a bigger event to potentially go into a challenger or some other FIBA 3x3 event. So the goal for us right now is to actually start looking at the framework of 3x3, kind of create more of those events, more opportunities, and work with anyone who is willing to want to be a promoter and run their own events within Scotland. How can we actually support to allow those things to kind of flourish? Because again, it's not something that we want to just gatekeep and this is what we do. 3x3 is a little bit more open. It's actually a little bit more player-led as well. It's not it's a little bit, it's not as institutional as a traditional game, and I want to keep it that way. So the infrastructure around refereeing, supporting, running events, understanding the rules, that's something that we really definitely want to kind of pursue. And then look at opportunities of kind of looking at those courts and saying that how can we take them on the road and maximise them to the best of our abilities.
Amazing, Kieron. Thank you very much for your time. Look to catch up with you soon again.
Thank you, and honestly, keep going. I mentioned that the storytelling is such a big piece, and I'm just glad that someone in the community is out there trying to bring awareness to the game. Thank you.
Kieron, it's much appreciated. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Scottish Basketball Podcast. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend who you think would like it too. We post weekly episodes on the senior game in Scotland. You can join for free on Patreon, Spotify and YouTube to receive a notification when new episodes are released. Access to the podcast episodes will always be free. You can, however, make a contribution for yourself or for someone else as a gift through membership on Patreon. However small and infrequent, any contribution is very helpful and very much appreciated. You can get in touch with the podcast by sending us a message on Instagram or an email. Join us again soon for another episode. Goodbye.